Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this SRP and Europa webinar on EMF, a different sort of radiation. So this webinar will be recorded and added to SRP's YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please answer through the Q&A box. Again, the most liked questions will be asked first, and those that we don't have time to ask will be emailed to the presenter afterwards and posted for SRP members on our website. Please email the code +/EMF pound to cpd@srp-uk.org, and this will help register your attendance, and you will receive an email after the webinar to claim your 1 CPD point. At the end, can you please provide feedback to charlene.matthewman@srp-uk.org. So a bit more about why you should join SRP. Firstly, there is the weekly e-newsletter, and there are a number of journals that you are provided with, specifically the Journal for Radiological Protection. It provides discounted attendance at conferences and full-day virtual events. It will keep you up to date with current aspects within the RP community. The SRP has access to job vacancies, and you can get involved in SRP committees, like this one, which is the webinar committee, as well as gain professional status such as chartership, TechRadP, and IRadP. For more information, please visit srp-uk.org and click on membership, which is in the top right of the website. We now have issue 8 of Radiation Protection Today out. This is a free magazine, and you can see it at www.srp-rpd.uk. And finally, just to make you aware that the 7th European ERPA Congress is coming to Liverpool next year from the 1st to 5th of June. Further information is available at the ERPA website, which is there. The abstract submissions are currently open, but this will close at the end of next month, as well as sponsor and exhibition opportunities are also available. I will now pass you over to Oliver, who will provide further information on our presenter today.
Thank you very much. So before I introduce our speaker, I'd just like to remind people, if they would like to join AURPO, if they work in the higher education sector or adjacent, we're quite friendly, so please consider sort of joining AURPO. And our annual conference is the 9th to 10th of September in Kiel, so there's still an opportunity to sort of register for that. So it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, who is Hugo Bibby. Hugo's been working with EMF for over 40 years. For the last 30 years, he's been working at Link Microtech, making EMF measurements on anything across the frequency range DC to 100 gigahertz. His early career centered on high-power amplifiers for defense radar systems, but with his time at Link, he's involved in various aerospace, broadcast, telecoms, industrial, scientific, and medical projects. When he's not stuck behind a laptop, he spends his working day on rooftops or in factories, peering at displays of electric and magnetic field strengths. And he's a chartered member of the Society for Radiological Protection. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Hugo for his talk on EMF, a different sort of radiation.
Well, thank you for that introduction. So, yeah, EMF, a different sort of radiation. I guess my alternate title would have been a stroll around 30 plus years in EMF measurements and some takeaways from that, but the other title seems a little bit more snappy, so I did go with that. So what I'll be covering, some typical sources of concern, I don't really like the phrase "the science," but I've used it, and a little bit about ICNIRP, and that's the International Commission on Non-Ionising Radiation Protection. Then a little bit about risk perception and how that feeds through into EMF risk assessments. So, some common sources of concern. This is supposed to be a microwave oven, chat reaching into a microwave oven, obviously a mobile phone, Wi-Fi, electricity distribution towers. That's what they're called, not pylons technically. Then a current favourite, 5G, and here some telecoms rooftop antennas. But these are just some things that over my 30 odd years in EMF measurements, these are sort of things that have cropped up, typical sources of concern. So, telecoms rooftop antennas. It's been a common question over the years. Oh, we've got a lot of antennas on our rooftop, then is there an issue for us inside the building? Then really, broadly, no. The antennas are very directional. They don't. They have a reflector behind the radiating elements, so they don't really radiate to the rear of the antenna. They don't radiate down into the building. Very much designed to radiate away from the building. It's true to say that if you've got an adjacent building, then there could be some field strength from the antennas in the other building. But here, it's true to say that field strength falls off very rapidly with distance from the source. So in essence, certainly telecoms rooftop antennas for people within the building, not too much of an issue at all. Another common question, microwave dishes. These little white drums that you might see on towers or rooftops. Essentially, point-to-point links, a means of getting data from one site to another. The point with these dishes used for telecoms purposes, they're very low power. Here I'm saying it's half a watt compared to something like a microwave oven, which could be up at 800-900 watts. They're also very directional. They transmit a narrow beam really towards another dish, which will be mounted above ground level. So the field strength at ground level is really going to be tiny. And again, microwave dishes don't present too much of a hazard. Even when you're on a rooftop, relatively close to a microwave dish, on a rare occasion that you could get in front of one, then with such low power, many of these dishes are actually touch safe. There's no exclusion zone. I'm not saying get in front of the dish, because certainly not, because somebody will lose their data. You'll break the link by getting in front of the dish. But in essence, they are low power sources. Now on to the more topical one, 5G. My standard phrase here, 5G is a name, not a quantity. 5G has many different frequency bands. And the majority of use cases, certainly here in the UK at the moment, then those frequency bands are very similar to those utilised by other telecoms applications. The common 5G frequency at about 3.5 gigahertz isn't really that much different from other telecoms frequencies. A lot of the concern around 5G seems to have focused around the fact that it's high frequency. Yes, there is the possibility of using high frequencies for 5G, but at the moment, that's really quite rare, particularly here in the UK. But it's important to note that high frequency doesn't mean high risk. And I'll explain a little bit more about that later on. And I guess for many, then it's the terminology around 5G which can be a little bit concerning. Beamforming doesn't sound necessarily a good thing, but simply put, it's just a more efficient means of providing connection with a handset. You'll get fewer drop calls, better coverage. It's a more efficient system. So not anything automatically bad with beamforming. Now, just so it's not all high frequency, I thought I'd throw in electricity distribution into the mix. And it's true to say that a magnetic field will be present when you've got some current flow within a conductor. You've got a magnetic field around the conductor with that current flow. And it's true to say that in public areas, magnetic fields from overhead lines are going to be low. However, and this is an example, I'd say, where science and research is going to significant effort to try and find health effects. It's just that some epidemiological studies have suggested an association with childhood leukemia, and clearly that's very emotive. It's true to say that many studies have failed to find that, but because some studies have found a possible association, then it has been noted. However, within this, it's important to note that it's very much a weak statistical association. It's very small, it's very subtle, and also then it's true to say that it's then has been very difficult to find a causal link between that and exactly what would be causing the health effect. And again, just to put some low frequency balance into this, I took a meter into the kitchen. This is a field strength meter, and I thought I'd measure an induction hob. Now, I was really quite surprised to see, if you can see that meter reading, at 180% of the this is the ICNIRP, and I'll explain about ICNIRP later on, the ICNIRP general public reference level. And I was quite surprised by that. However, I do have to say that I was doing a little bit of a cheat in that I was using a small size pan on a larger ring on the oven. So I suspect the manufacturer's recommendations say that I shouldn't do that, and I should match up the right size saucepan with the right size ring. But I thought it's plausible that somebody could stick a small saucepan on said ring. And so it's really an example of risk perception. You might get relatively high field strengths from pieces of equipment that you feel are more trustworthy. You might not be too worried about something that's, well, yeah, somebody must have tested this, has assessed this, and they certainly have. The manufacturer will have gone to some lengths to make sure that their equipment is compliant with safety standards. Nevertheless, you can achieve quite a high field strength from this induction hob. Yeah, for frequency of induction hobs is somewhere between 25 and 50 kilohertz, so really quite low, relatively low in frequency. Well, relatively low frequency compared to a microwave oven. A microwave oven works at a frequency of 2.45 gigahertz. It's powered by a thermionic device, a magnetron. And they're relatively high power, 900 watts, but it's important to note that that power is designed to be contained in the oven. That said, it's possible to have some leakage, particularly if you haven't looked after your oven, your door seal is messy, and yeah, you might have some leakage from that. I've had some questions over the years about microwave ovens. No, all the microwaves don't pour out of the door when you open it. When you open the door, the field strength will disappear instantaneously. Another common one, microwaves don't cook from the inside out. And we all know that really, because when we do put something in the microwave oven, say something that needs defrosting, then the outer part thaws out quite quickly, but the centre remains frozen. So no, we know microwaves don't cook from the inside out. That's another little urban myth that crops up from time to time. Anyway, I thought I would do some measurements. Principally, I thought I'd do some measurements at the old beaten up microwave oven in the office. So I thought that would be a good bet for some field strength. But I was really disappointed to find that in actual fact, my microwave oven at home was, a little bit leakier really. So I had a reading of 2.5 watts per metre squared. That won't mean anything to normal humans, but that's about 25% of the general public reference level. And again, I had a thought then, which wouldn't be common. I thought, oh, great, I've got some field strength. This will be a really good example to see how field strength decreases rapidly with distance. So I moved, and this is relatively accurate. I'd say the difference here in the images is really, I've got to say, I was initially found this when I was cooking my porridge in the morning. So I had other things on my mind, and sort of accuracy about the images wasn't in the forefront of my mind. But I did put some element of control into these distances, so they're pretty accurate. Difference between 0 cent, right up against the oven, and then 5 centimeters. The kit is on a tripod, so measurement uncertainty related distance, yeah, pretty good. So 5 centimeters, 10 centimeters. It's gone down to about 0.5 watts per meter squared. Then at 20 centimeters, I'm down at 0.25. So field strength has indeed fallen rapidly with distance from the source. That's a good thing. However, before we start talking about the killer in the kitchen, there is a big caveat. I did do this with nothing in the oven. And I'm sure the manufacturer's recommendations tell me that I shouldn't do that. So now with something actually in the oven, I was really quite surprised how much the field strength did reduce. So with my porridge in the oven, then we're down a lot. So that energy is being absorbed by the porridge rather than coming from the oven. Much reduced leakage. So with that talk of power, the power of a microwave oven, then I thought I'd sort of cover these low power sources like phones and Wi-Fi with this slide. Essentially, if you want to think about a very basic, a sort of more pragmatic EMF risk assessment, then very much the first question is how much power is available from the source. So when we're up here in the red part of the traffic light, we've got hundreds of watts or many kilowatts, then that's a lot of power. There is actually the capacity there to do the body quite serious harm if you get up close and personal with these sort of field strengths from this sort of power level. Then as we come down, we're sort of tens of watts. Then yeah, there's the possibility of some issues, but you, in all honesty, you really do have to try quite hard to have a serious non-compliance. And then, as I say, with these low power sources, then there really is no issue, no possibility really of exceeding safety guidelines. So right, onto the science. As I say, I don't really like the term, so I've sort of gone with the flow because I see it bandied around. And very much the science it's tricky really. Who is the arbiter of what is safe and what isn't? Then very much ICNIRP comes to the fore, the International Commission for Non-Ionising Radiation Protection, established back in 1992 as a non-profit organisation and recognised by the World Health Organisation and the EU, amongst others. The remit covers static, extra low frequency, radio frequency, microwave, infrared and light, plus ultrasound. The guidance comes in the form of guidelines, periodic reviews, statements, and it's important to note that the guidelines consider all potential adverse health effects and use this definition. Health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. And here, the academic rigour which you apply to the studies. So ICNIRP, they just review the available science. And so they say, generally needs to be observed in more than one study, need to be performed in accepted practice, good quality. And then the purpose of these guidelines is so that they can be used by health authorities, national authorities. Now, for higher frequency exposures, then the guidance steers us to something like this, where we're talking about whole body heating. If you really do extreme exercise, and I think this figure is really quite high, I can't remember where I sourced that from, but it is high, and so we're talking about extreme exercise where you could generate something like 12 watts per kilogram. So okay, that's a lot. Now, within the ICNIRP guidelines, they say, yeah, for 6 watts per kilogram of exposure to high frequency, then for at least 1 hour, then it's possible to induce a core body temperature increase of 1 degree centigrade. Okay. There's a little bit of question about the data for that. So ICNIRP have been cautious, and from their 1998 guidelines, they have rolled over a figure of 4 watts per kilogram into their 2020 guidelines. So they say, yeah, for 30 minutes, 4 watts per kilogram, it's possible to achieve this 1 degree centigrade core body temperature increase. They then introduce a factor of 10 safety factor and set for IGNR, that would be basic restrictions. This stands for exposure limit values, which is something used in the regulations. These are then set at 0.4 watts per kilogram. So when we're doing assessments in certainly in the workplace, then it's difficult to assess directly against these exposure limit values. So we assess using field strength values, which are largely set to be even a little bit lower potentially than the exposure limit values, again being a little bit on the precautionary side. So really what I'm saying here is that the reference levels or action levels, exposure limit values, basic restrictions, they are on the cautious side, which I think is an important point in when we look at the subject of risk perception in relation to those permissible exposure levels. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list at all. This is just a list of sort of studies, the sort of studies which IGNR might consider. And so this one I know a little bit about. That's the Mobile Telecoms Health Research project, which was spawned from something called the Stewart Report back in 2000, something like that. And so a significant amount of money, £13.6 million, spent on investigating various things: cancers, brain function, electrical hypersensitivity, etc. And largely, it was all negative results. It couldn't really find any causal link between low-level exposure and these symptoms. And then we've had these other studies, the Interphone study, Moby Kids, looking at, again, very emotive subject, the risk of brain cancer in children and adolescents. And again, no evidence to find that there was the causation of cancer. And coming more up to date, then Goliath, this is ongoing, and studies looking at, as it says, questions raised by new wireless technologies, specifically 5G. I put this last one in, actually, Register of RF Workers. It's not a study per se, but it's something that I've been involved with for many years. And the idea is it's a database of those who are occupationally exposed. So if anybody wants to do a study on those occupationally exposed people, then be aware you've got the Register of RF Workers as a resource. So, like I say, the purpose of this slide is to say that there's a lot of science, a lot of weight behind the IGNR reviews. Now, something that IGNR published this year, these knowledge gaps, and it's quite interesting, I think, because here we're seeing issues where data gaps are not identified. Then it's IGNR saying, yeah, we've got some good scientific evidence here, some really quite subtle effects. Oxidative stress. It says here, I'm no expert, it says thought to be involved in the development of various diseases such as cancer, maybe Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. It affects how the body deals with potentially toxic free radicals and peroxides, which are produced in the body via reactive oxygen species, ROS. Apparently, ROS are both good and bad in the body. And then this possibility of hypersensitivity, lots of studies have been carried out on that. blood-brain barrier. My reference to that, I remember, is around Tetra, a digital radio, and there was the possibility associated with that, some sort of calcium efflux, movement of calcium through the blood-brain barrier. Early studies found that. Then from memory, then other studies said no, that was disproven. Brain physiology and function, there's memory, sleep patterns, vestibular function, balance, auditory effects. I suspect that links in with exposure to pulsed microwave, where there was apparently some studies suggested an association with thermoelastic expansion of something in the inner ear, where you could actually hear a microwave pulse, etc. Cancer. So ICNAB are saying, yeah, we've got some good research on this, and now they're saying where we are interested in things relates to plane threshold for EMF heating, core temperature rise, ocular injury, and contact currents. That's something I have been familiar with in my career, and yes, they do hurt. And here, I think, when we start talking about risk perception, then this is where it starts to get a little bit contentious for those who are very much concerned about EMF exposure. Then they think ICNIRP are missing a trick here. Like they are missing something within the evidence, because they believe that there is the possibility of effects from low-level exposures for these and other effects. Anyway, that's ICNIRP. Now moving across into an occupational context, and I haven't spent much time on this because we've had various other presentations covering the legislation side for employers, particularly within the UK, and it's similar across Europe, certainly, because the UK regs were spawned from an EU directive when we were part of the EU. Anyway, the UK legislation, the Control of Electromagnetic Fields at Work Regulations 2016, then it places an obligation on employers to do a risk assessment relating to EMF. The point is that the regulations use the ICNIRP guidelines as the basis for the permissible exposure levels, but the regulations apply very much to those who are at work, not the general public. So that's a quick run through there. And now how that rolls into risk perception. So why do I think we might have some heightened risk perception around EMF and higher frequencies, telecoms frequencies? I think it's because we've got a lot of very obvious sources in the environment over the last 30-35 years. Then there's been a lot of telecoms infrastructure has been introduced into the environment. Some of it looks it's quite industrial, imposing, and it's very obvious that it's there. Maybe when we're doing a comparison to risk perception associated with ionizing radiation, then we probably don't have those obvious ionizing radiation sources in the environment. And I just wonder if this is why EMF just does attract some heightened risk perception. And what do we get as a result of this risk perception? It's quite surprising when you trawl around what's online. This is recent stuff. This is happening in Belfast, Northern Ireland, very recently. I think it's 15, 16 5G masts. Invariably, they're towers, not masts, but I won't be too specific about that. And it's quite amazing to me that you've got people who are so angry that they will set a tower on fire. Quite a significant fire on some of these towers. Back in the day, they just used to get the angle grinder out and chop them down and fell them like trees. I noticed this actually. It's freely available on the internet. Freedom of Information request about a number of attacks on what are thought probably to be 5G base stations. Sometimes they're honestly not. They're just other telecoms towers where they've been trying to set on fire. It seems that the pandemic was really quite good looking at these dates for inspiring people had more time on their hands. So why not go and set something on fire? And this, in relation to the pandemic, personally, I find it quite remarkable that during the pandemic, somebody at the World Health Organization had to address this, that 5G doesn't actually spread coronavirus. What mechanism you could employ could conceive to do that, I have no idea. But as I say, it was at the time it was a common subject, but clearly not true. So anyway, moving on. Still in the risk perception area, then the reason we know, say, for telecoms frequencies, it's really quite easy to do calculations to estimate where a field strength is at a distance from an antenna. So in public areas, we know before we start that field strengths are going to be low. And again, it's this point that field strengths fall very rapidly with distance from the source. And as I say, these are just various commercially available software packages which generate a map of field strength around an antenna. But really what's behind them is this simple calculation. So the power density, and that's measured in watts per meter squared, equals power times gain, and gain is something you get from the antenna. Then is divided by this 4 pi d squared, where this d, small d, is distance from the antenna in meters. So it's an example of it's showing you why power density falls with the square of the distance from the source, the inverse square law. So we know that field strengths from antennas will be low at a certain distance from the antenna. And we can back that up with measurements. So here, this was just a random site close to our office in Basingstoke. So I went out with some measurement equipment and measured. This was in, I don't know, probably about 80 meters from the site, with directly in line with one of the antennas. I've got to say it's a relatively quick and dirty look, because the way you take measurements of various signals, you can play around with bandwidth settings, resolution bandwidth, but no need to get into that today. We can dot the I's, but just this is as I say, a quick and dirty look. So the highest peak here equates to something like 0.0016% of the general public level, and that is at 2.1 gigahertz. If you add all of these up, all of these field strengths together, and by doing this I'm sort of taking a bit of a worst case, because the ICNAP levels, the permissible exposure levels, change with frequency, so these peaks need to be weighting accordingly, and really in this I'm not doing that, so I'm taking a worst case. And here we're at again, very low percentages of that ICNIRP general public level. And so these two numbers are from the actual field strength, and then the recording device has a means to record all the maximum values, and even doing it, and so those maximum values don't occur at the same point in time. So again, it's a sort of a false worst case, but we're still at 0.1% of the ICNIRP general public reference level. So pretty low field strengths. So we zoom in a little bit on 5G, and we've got a couple of 5G signals here. And again, how you measure 5G is technically can be quite complicated. And it's actually true to say that we had 5G rollout, and measurement standards were actually playing catch up with that a little bit. And we're probably only we now have got a solution which is relatively easy, but in this example it is a quick and dirty look. But however you do the measurements, then the field strength are still going to be really low compared with those ICNIRP general public reference levels. And again, here lies the problem. Because those that are concerned about these field strengths, then they think the permissible exposure levels have been set too high, and these very low levels are actually significant with regard to their health. So diving then in more specifically into factors of risk perception, and these are fairly well known. So we've got these cognitive factors, how understood the risk is, how we feel about that, do we trust the information sources, and do we have any particular experience? How does our own personality view that information? Telecoms issue specifically, the problem with some of this is that individuals feel completely out of control. They feel that telecoms towers might have been forced upon them. It's technical subject matter, so it's quite difficult to understand that. Specific absorption rate, that's the watts per kilogram thing. Beam forming, massive MIMO, this is antenna technology that enables beam forming. It all sounds pretty scary. And sometimes the benefits of new technology are unclear. I mean, for some people, 4G might have been doing very well for them. Do we really need 5G? There are very good reasons for why 5G is necessary, but they're not always obvious to the end user. And something else, natural versus man-made risks. Folk are generally more accepting of natural risks. If we think about static electricity, then it's a little bit of a party trick. But if our hair stood on end every time we walked past a telecoms tower, that might be a different story. We might be more concerned about that. Again, natural versus man-made effects. Here, obviously, we're just heating a pot over a campfire. But if we compare that with the microwave, then most people are probably more concerned with the microwave. But in both examples, we're still just jiggling molecules to generate some heat. Furthermore, I think within the population, maybe there is a mistrust of science and scientists. That's been demonstrated by concerns over COVID vaccinations, then the MMR issues, vaccination, people being concerned about that, and the take-up rate being affected. Yeah. Doom scrolling apparently is a thing. The human psyche is drawn to bad news. And then conspiracy theories, probably not enough time to go into that here. But then when we put all that together, then individuals either believe the ICNIRP guidance or they don't. My take on this, I read this somewhere, and the quote is, "Things grow legs, take a life of their own, go wherever they go, and there's momentum behind them. But no, I don't always understand it." And really, that's where I'm at with this particular area of risk perception. So how does that feed into EMF risk assessments? Firstly, it's true to say that that there is no formal framework. It's different to ionising radiation, where we've got no formal framework around competence for those performing assessments. Nothing legally binding around measurement equipment, and with this sort of heightened risk perception, it's created a market for low-cost surveys, so measurement surveys. So I would suggest there are people out there who are taking money for surveys whose competence might be in question. It's difficult to assess that. One good steer through the SRP are these documents, which I think are freely available. And so if you look at the points that are within this core of knowledge document for assessment training, it kind of covers what you're, if you're using a contractor to do an EMF assessment, kind of covers what they should know, what they should be doing, and also what should be in an assessment report. And why you do need to be competent. Sometimes things are important. Anything involving work at a particular risk with active implanted medical devices, you kind of need to know what you're doing. And stuff involving contact currents. The effect here is instantaneous. This is rare, I have to say, but there are occasions where you do really need some expertise. You know, like, as I say, it doesn't just have to be in big broadcast equipment where this slide was taken from. I've seen examples of contact currents in factories, and there you clearly do need to know what you're doing. Also, how risk perception feeds into what we do. Sometimes we waste time looking at Wi-Fi routers, when in actual fact we should be looking at high power sources. Usual suspects here: resistance welding, non-destructive testing, induction heating. And it's here where field strengths can be high, people can be close to that, and it's there where we do need, again, some expertise, and where we need to focus our attention. Also, in terms of measurement equipment, the risk perception has spawned a good number of really quite low cost, highly inaccurate pieces of measurement equipment, which really shouldn't be used in a professional environment, or quite frankly, anywhere else for that matter. So here, this was a colleague, he noticed this particular meter was saying that his mug of tea was particularly harmful. So I suspect that relates to temperature sensitivity, which might not be a fair test on this particular device. So I did again go into the kitchen and just put it next to the kettle, and indeed that was again hazardous, apparently harmful, sorry, is what it says. It's highly inaccurate equipment, which, if used in a professional environment, this where we came across it, it was being used by a worker, part of a much larger organisation, and it did cause unnecessary concern and some disruption and some cost to the employer, the organisation. Right, just starting to wrap up now, so I know I'm at risk of going over time. So some problems with EMF risk communication. Often you've got a very varied audience. The technical understanding with that audience could vary enormously. And it's just not easy to do that with a technical subject. And really, we want to produce an informed public or workforce. Trust in the public context, as I say, telecoms towers are often forced on sites where maybe site owners or local residents are really unhappy with that. It doesn't help create trust. And it's certainly some issues that I've been aware of, and some employees don't necessarily trust employer advice. The technical jargon doesn't help being transparent. It gets in the way of that sometimes. Another point, timeliness. Certainly with regard to 5G, I'd say information from the industry was probably a little bit slow in coming, but I have to say it's very difficult to get out in front of everything that has surrounded 5G. And it's true to say that it is easier to communicate in an occupational context compared to public areas, but public issues do spill over into, we're all people, and do spill over into an occupational context. But there it is important to make sure that if you are working with EMF, you have a simple EMF safety policy and that it is shared with stakeholders. So in summary, is EMF a different sort of radiation? Not really. If we're talking about the fact that it's the emission and transmission of energy through space, then no, EMF is different. Do I think risk perception is skewed in some areas? Yes, I do. But I really don't want that to detract from real hazards. Some of those are in occupational risk assessments. Is the situation likely to continue? Yeah, I think it is. We've got 6G on the way, stuff like wireless power transfer. It's going to create more debate, and I think the situation we're in will continue. And a last little note, sometimes I am frustrated that there is no formal framework around competence. It would be nice if somebody would take it on. But as of now, there is nothing on the horizon.